Good morning, all. Let's continue the narrative of Julian Kopak, The Jungle Air Crash. Children, last class we had discussed about her flight journey, plane crash, and the days she spent in the jungle among the perils without proper food and sleep. The open wound on my foot was getting worse due to infection by insects. Every time the flies stung, they were laying eggs in my wounds, out of which were hatching maggots. Helplessly, I watched them emerge. Each one was about a centimeter long. They were eating me alive. God, help me, I thought. They will amputate if I ever survive. Children, Julian had an open wound on her foot and it was getting worse due to infection by insects. She could not give any first aid for that, so every time the flies stung on that and they were laying eggs in her wounds and out of which were hatching maggots. Maggots means what, children? Small worms. She did nothing. Helplessly, she watched them emerge, and each worm was about a centimeter long, and they were eating her alive. She cried to God in agony and sought help from God to escape from that. The river that I painstakingly followed was widening. Whenever I could get a good view ahead, I risked swimming. The river that she painstakingly followed. Painstakingly means what? Taking pains and troubles. That was very difficult. So the river which she followed was very widening, and whenever she could get a good view ahead, she started swimming. It was faster because the current carried me along. On land, I picked my way, careful to watch where I put my feet because the rotting foliage could conceal a snake or a poisonous thorn back crab. Swimming was faster because the swift current carried her along. On land, while walking, she was so careful for each step because the rotting means decaying, foliage leaves, the decayed leaves could hide a snake or a poisonous thorn, that is bat crab. And she said herself, if she tread on a crab, tread means put her feet strongly, forcefully on a crab, then surely it will bite. Walking had become progressively harder. The lack of food and the humid 45 degrees heat had made me weaker. The river was now so swift that I could no longer swim in it. The situation became worse as she could not walk longer because lack of food and the humid, that is 45 degrees heat, had made her weaker. Then what was the next option to go ahead? Swimming. But the river was so swift that she could no longer swim in it. Late one afternoon, I was looking for a spot to lie down for the night. It was the 10th day, as I later reconstructed it. Suddenly, I saw a boat moored on the river bank, and there was a path leading to a small hut. Children, it was her 10th day in jungle. She couldn't muster energy to move ahead as the lack of food and the 45 degrees heat had made her weaker. That day afternoon, she was looking for a spot to lie down for the night. Suddenly, she saw a boat moored on the river bank. She saw a boat moored. Moored means secured with ropes. She saw a boat moored on the river bank, and there was a path leading to a small hut. She entered and saw on the floor a small outboard motor carefully wrapped in plastic and a can of petrol. Clearly, someone would be coming back. But when? When she entered into that small hut, she saw On the floor, a small outboard motor carefully wrapped in plastic and a can of petrol. After saw this, she was sure that someone would be coming back, but she thought herself when they would be coming back. I lay down on the floor and slept badly because I kept listening for human voices. But I heard only the screaming of monkeys and the screeching of parakeets. At other times, something seemed to be moving outside dangerously near. She lay down on the floor and slept badly. That means she could not sleep well because she kept listening for human voices. But she didn't hear any human voices. Instead, she heard only the screaming of monkeys and the screeching of parakeets. Parakeets, it's a type of parrot. And other times, something seemed to be moving outside dangerously near. The next morning, I wanted to push on. It might be days, even weeks, before the people came for their boat. But I didn't want to take a boat which belonged to someone else. The next morning, even though she was not at all healthy, she wanted to move from there. It might be days, even weeks before the people came for their boat. It was possible to take that boat and went from there. But she did not want to take a boat which belonged to some others. However, the rain was pouring down again, so I stayed in the hut. Then I heard voices, and three men plunged in from the downpour. Well, one of them exclaimed in Spanish, "What have we here?" She stayed in the hut as the rain was pouring down again. After some time, suddenly she heard voices, and three men plunged in from the downpour. Plunged means here it is a phrasal verb. Here it means rushed into. So three men rushed into the hut from the downpour. Downpour means heavy rain. And one of them exclaimed in Spanish that, "Well, what have we here?" The men were mestizo, that is, half white, half Indian hunters. They told me they kept several huts in the jungle for their expeditions. They knew about the crash, and one of them had actually been in a search plane which flew over the jungle after the accident. The men were mestizo. Mestizo means children, half white and half Indian hunters, and they kept several huts in the jungle. For what purpose? For their expeditions. What is meant by expedition? That is a journey organized for a particular purpose. A journey organized for a particular purpose. So they kept several huts in the jungle for their expeditions, for their journey. And they knew about the crash already. And one of them had been in a search plane which flew over the jungle for finding the particles. "We could see nothing," he said. "No people, no wreckage. They washed me with salt water and put salt on my wounds. They made fruit mash for me, but I was unable to eat." So, children, could they find any remains of or any wreckage of plane? No, they couldn't find anything. No people, no wreckage. Children, wreckage means remains of something that has been damaged. Here, it means remains of plane. They helped Julian by giving first aids, like they washed her with salt water and put salve on her wounds. Salve means ointment. And they made fruit mash for her. Mash here, it's a liquid. They made fruit mash for her, but she was unable to have that. Early next morning, they got their boat ready and took me down river. My river, it was the Shibuya, became wider, swifter, and more dangerous. Next morning, they got ready their boat and started from there. The river Shibuya became wider, swifter, and more dangerous one. I looked at the shore where I would have had to walk and saw that it became more and more impassable. During that journey, she looked at the shore where she had to walk, and she found that it became more and more impossible. If she did not come across those people, she could not get away from there because going ahead, the shore where she have had to walk became more and more impossible. It took us hours to get to the jungle settlement of Turna Vista. People came running and shouting to stare at me. One of my rescuers explained why. My eyes were so bloodshot, they looked entirely red, and my face was disfigured and swollen out of shape from the insect bites. My arms and legs were pocked with worm lesions. I looked like a living nightmare. Reaching the jungle settlement of Turna Visita was time consuming. And when they reached there, people in that place came running and shouting at her. That time, one of her rescuers explained the reason for their shouting. And what was the reason? Her eyes were so bloodshot and they looked entirely red, and also her face was disfigured due to the insect bites. It swollen out of shape from the insect bites, and her arms and legs were pocked with worm lesions. Pocking means pock, that is as if by smallpox, that is pocked. Pocked with the worm lesions. Lesions means wound. So her arms and legs were pocked with the worm lesions, and really she looked like a living nightmare. Because Turna Vista was an agricultural colony, it had a small dispensary where I was washed and my wounds treated. They used a special medicine to clean out all the worms and gave me an injection to counteract inflammation. Turna Visita was an agricultural colony, so there was a small dispensary, and where she was washed and her wounds were treated. And they used a special medicine to clean out all the worms and gave her an injection to counteract inflammation, that is injection to that swelling. 11.5 days after our crash, I again boarded a plane, a small twin-engined machine that took me to the US mission base of the Summer Institute of Linguistics near Pucallpa, where an American doctor looked after me. With the help of my directions, search planes found the wreckage. Daddy arrived to stay by my side. He told me what I had suspected. My mother was dead. It was 11.5 days after the plane crash, and she again boarded a plane, that is a small twin-engined machine that took her to the US mission base on the Summer Institute of Linguistics near Pucallpa, where an American doctor treated her. And the search planes could find the wreckage with the help of her directions. And that time, her father arrived to stay by her side, and he told her what she had expected, that is, her mother was dead. At last, searchers found the Electra scattered of over 16 kilometers of jungle, but the cause of the crash and how Jolene got safely down are an unknown thing. And one theory is that the plane exploded at 3000 meters and that the fall of some pieces was cushioned by an enormous upward current of air in the storm. See, children, a 16-year-old girl survived from a dangerous situation. And what did help her to overcome all this? Her willpower, strong determination, optimistic attitude, and the knowledge which she gained from her parents about the perils of jungle. All these helped her to survive from dangerous and risky things.
The tropical rainforest, a strange, beautiful, but deadly place. Here nature provides all the necessities for survival, but when you are lost in the jungle, you are close to death. Survivor dramatically reconstructs true stories of human endurance in some of the world's most dense rainforests and explores the science of their survival. The Amazonian Peruvian rainforest. In the intense heat and humidity, life and death are close companions. The basic law here is hunt or be hunted, eat or be eaten. The competition to survive is at its most extreme. This jungle has the greatest concentration of plant and animal life on Earth. Here, Mother Nature is at her most diverse. 30 million different species of insects alone inhabit this vast ecosystem. To the people who live here, the jungle is a familiar and friendly place. But to outsiders, it can be alien and terrifying. Near Pucallpa in Peru, two noted German zoologists, Marie and Hans Köpke, had established a research station. They were making a detailed study of rainforest ecology. With them lived their only child, 17-year-old Julianne. This is her extraordinary story. It begins in Lima, the capital, on Christmas Eve 1971. Marie Köpke had flown to Lima to meet Julianne and complete her Christmas shopping. Julianne attended a secondary school in the city. During school holidays, she stayed with her parents at the research station. Like her parents, she loved the jungle and frequently joined them on field trips into the depths of the rainforest. Late that afternoon, they boarded a plane for the 1.5-hour flight to Pucallpa. It was late taking off. The passengers were frustrated by the delay. Everyone wanted to be home for Christmas.
I hate this airline. We should have stuck it out for the Aero Peru flight. I should be so mad if we don't make it home by Christmas Eve. Your father's gone to so much trouble. He's even decorated a Christmas tree.
Don't worry, Mum, we'll make it. You know, I'd rather have a plane that works.
Don't even joke about it. You know I hate flying.
Half an hour into the flight, the aircraft experienced severe turbulence.
The engine's on fire.
Still strapped in her seat, Julianne fell over 10,000 feet. Incredibly, the thick forest canopy broke her fall. She remained unconscious for several hours.
When I came to, it was daylight. Everything was a blur. I turned to look where my mother had been sitting. There was nothing.
Julianne didn't know if her mother had survived the crash. Now she was on her own, lost in 2.5 million square miles of unmapped jungle. Her chances of survival were bleak.
Oh my God. You'll never find me here. When I came to again, I felt really dizzy. My head was hurting and it seemed like my collarbone was broken. But strangely, I wasn't in any real pain. I was more concerned about my mother. I called to her, but no one answered. No one. I had to find help. I had to stay alive. If I stayed where I was, I'd never been found. The canopy was so dense, I could hardly see the sky. I tried to block out as many fears as I could and concentrate on getting through the undergrowth. I had been in the jungle many times, but never on my own. My parents told me if I was ever lost in the jungle, I had to look for a river because all the local Indians use the rivers. They're their highways. So I knew if I found one, I would eventually come across one of their villages, and they could take me to Pakulpa where my father would be waiting for me. I kept looking for wreckage of the plane, hoping I'd find my mother, but there was no sign of anyone.
On Christmas Day, the day after the explosion, Julianne came across a stream. She followed it, hoping it would lead to a river and eventual rescue.
The jungle is teeming with insects. You lay your hand down for a moment and it'll be covered like a glove by ants. But the worst things are the mosquitoes and other flies. It was impossible to keep them away. I was constantly bitten. I didn't realize at the time they were laying their eggs under my skin. The heat and humidity exhausted me. I was soaking wet all the time, but at least I could walk. I wasn't too hungry, and luckily there was plenty of clear water to drink. The only food I had was some boiled sweets I'd bought as Christmas presents for the children of our Indian guide, Awakina. He was always telling us there were lots of things we could eat in the jungle. Fruits, berries, nuts, leaves and roots. Mother was always keeping notes on whatever he said, because she was convinced jungle vegetation held secrets which would cure many diseases.
Okay.
But she also said that most jungle plants and fruits had developed poisons to protect themselves from insects. Everywhere I looked, there seemed to be delicious-looking fruits. I saw howler monkeys eating them, but I didn't dare. I was too scared they might be poisonous. The last thing I needed was to come down with a fever.
Hans Köpke, Julianne's father, joined the search parties on Christmas morning. The light aircraft trawled back and forth over the exact area of the crash without knowing it. The wreckage had been completely swallowed by the dense canopy of the jungle. When darkness falls in the jungle, you cross a threshold. Shadows begin to move, attracted by the body's heat and the scent of blood. At night, Julianne struggled to stay awake. Her survival depended on it. On the second day, as Julianne made her way through a dark grove of twisted roots, she heard the droning sound of flies.
Seeing the dead passengers made me realize what might have happened to my mother.
Julianne remembered the last time her family had been together. It was on her 17th birthday.
Maybe I shouldn't go back.
Happy birthday, dear Tia. Happy birthday. Happy 17th.
By the third day, the stream had swollen to become a river. Julianne swam for hours, but the rivers of the Peruvian jungle meander endlessly. She covered less than a mile. The search parties continued searching in vain. The forest canopy remained a beautiful but impenetrable dome.
By the 5th day, the pain from my broken collarbone began to make walking more difficult. But in spite of my pain, I moved on as best I could. As the river deepened, I got more frightened. I saw caiman by the riverbank. They drag their prey beneath the surface, drown them, and store them underwater until they are tender enough to eat. I was also worried the blood from my cuts would attract piranha fish. I'd heard of piranhas turning people to skeletons in a minute, but I had no choice. Then I saw the vultures. Where there are vultures, there is usually dead flesh. I knew they'd been eating the people from the crash. The mosquitoes and flies never left me. My wounds were getting worse. The flies' eggs had grown into larvae under my skin. I could actually feel them crawling and feeding on the tissue and fat. Some had pushed their heads through the sores. My arms felt raw and had begun to smell. I thought, oh my God, they'll have to amputate them. I had to do something. I got my ring, twisted it into a hook, and used it to pull the maggots out one by one. It was agonizing. I counted 33, but I knew there were more I couldn't get to. For the first time since I'd left the wreckage, I wondered how long I could go on. Silently I called on those I loved to help me. In my heart, I knew now that I might die. On the 7th or 8th day, I'd lost count. I was completely exhausted. It was becoming difficult to concentrate. Even the simplest actions demanded a huge effort. My arm was a mess, and for the first time I began to feel real pain. I tried to squeeze as many maggots out as I could, but as soon as I got one out, more flies would lay their eggs. There was nothing I could do except bandage them the best I could and hope the infection wouldn't spread. I felt my whole body was alive with parasites. I pictured them feeding on my blood and sapping my strength. Sometimes I felt as though the jungle didn't want me to escape. Even the mud seemed to hold on to me and suck me down. I thought of my father all alone, and I said to myself, he's not going to lose his daughter. I will stay alive. I will.
Close to complete exhaustion, Julianne came upon a canoe beside a flimsy hut on the riverbank. It looked as if it had just been built, but no one was around. She staggered to the shelter and collapsed.